Just when you think you've heard every piece of dirt about Casey Anthony, new secrets spilled tonight. Stuff you need to know since you last saw her dragged out of jail and into court just a few days ago. We dug through more than 1,000 new documents tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Amy Kaufeld.
I'm Cale Remaker. First up, Casey's ex-boyfriend wired up, working with the cops, trying to get Casey's brother to reveal something about what happened to Kaylee. First on Fox, Cheryl Gatwiza in our studio with that. To say the least, pretty interesting stuff.
No, absolutely, Cale. Casey Anthony's ex-boyfriend, Tony Lazzaro, working with Orange County Sheriff's Office to record secret meetings and phone calls from Casey's brother, Lee.
July 29, 2008, 11 in the morning, more than a month after Kaylee disappeared and about 2 weeks after Casey Anthony's first arrest. Tony Lazzaro, you see him walking into the courthouse for a deposition in this case, called lead detective Yuri Melich to tell him about a meeting Lazzaro had scheduled with Lee Anthony later that day. Lazzaro, Casey's boyfriend at the time, told Melich Lee wanted to talk about his relationship with his sister Casey. Various times throughout that afternoon, Lazzaro called Lee to discuss a meeting place. Lazzaro recorded all those calls on his own. Then around 5 p.m., investigators with Orange County met up with Lazzaro to give him audio and video recording devices. Agents and Lazzaro then drove to a Subway sandwich shop in Winter Park to wait for Lee Anthony. Lee arrived close to 6 p.m., got into the passenger side of Lazzaro's car where the two started to talk. Lee tells Lazzaro there have been numerous tips about Kaylee's sightings, Julioto and East Orange County and Georgia. Lee then discusses the last time the family saw Kaylee. This is video from that day, June 15th, Father's Day last year. The conversation continued on for half an hour before he left to get a sandwich. 10 minutes later, he returned, and according to the wires, Lee goes on to talk about Casey and Zanny the nanny. He told Lazzaro his sister never said anything about a nanny. However, Lee thought he recalled a Zenaida who hung out at the Anthony home. He says his family grew concerned when Casey stopped talking to them and her friends in the spring of 2008. Then around 7:15, Lazzaro gets a call from Orange County detectives telling him to end the meeting.
Shortly after Lee exited the car, now Lazzaro meets up with Detective Melich and other agents to give them the recording equipment. Cale,
Cheryl, thanks. Also in these documents, a plant expert reveals his take on the foliage around Kaylee's remains. By his account, her remains had been in the woods at least 4 months before cops found them. We're learning more about the meter reader who tipped cops off to where the bones turned up back on December 11th. Roy Kronk says he had to use the bathroom. He brought his meter stick into the woods. That's where he found the bag and thought it was a weird dome shape. And at 5:30 tonight, a private detective claims Casey Anthony and her lawyer shared candy in a twisted way.
All of that a sideshow to what Casey Anthony told police the second time they hauled her off to jail last fall. Her interview that day is no longer between her and the investigators. Tonight, we are alerting you to everything she said. Continuing our live team coverage tonight, Holly Bristow is in the newsroom. And Holly, what did Casey reveal that day?
Well, Amy, this was on October 14th, the day that the grand jury came down with an indictment of murder charges, first-degree murder for Casey Anthony. What we're about to tell you is about a 17-minute period of time. FBI and Orange County Sheriff's Office are on the turnpike. They're pulling over a car that Casey Anthony was riding in after she left her attorney's office. Investigators thought she was trying to make a run for it. Casey says no.
You may remember this video. Fox 35 trailing behind Cindy and Casey Anthony, waiting to see if Cindy Anthony was taking her daughter to jail.
Holly will never get another exclusive.
Shortly after this, Casey Anthony switches from her mother's car to her bail bondsman's car alongside the highway. Investigators pull them over and take Casey into custody. Her first words to them, quote, "We've literally been stalked by the media." Casey tells detectives she's heard about the indictment and that she was being taken to jail. The investigator asks, quote, "Do you have any interest in helping us?" Casey's response, quote, "I've had interest in helping law enforcement from the beginning. Unfortunately, my hands were tied and I was put in a position where someone's trying to trick a confession out of me." Investigators then read Casey Anthony her rights. Casey Anthony tells investigators she'd entertain their questions with her attorney, Jose Baez, present. Casey then tells investigators, quote, "I try to keep an open mind when it comes to things, but if I'm innocent, that's as far as it goes. I'll take this as far as I need to prove my innocence," which I guess is my point in all of this.
Now, at that point, Casey Anthony tells investigators again that she and her mother, an attorney and bail bondsman, were not trying to elude police on the highway, that they were trying to get away from the media. The recorded conversation stops then, and as we know, Casey Anthony was taken to the Orange County Sheriff's Office for questioning, and then she was hauled off to jail. Reporting live in the newsroom, Holly Bristow, Fox at 5.
Holly,
Fox 35 News, all over 1,000 new documents released in the Casey Anthony case. What we dug up, a twisted story about Casey and her lawyer, one about candy, and one the lawyer says is simply not true. Holly Bristow live in the newsroom tonight with more on that. Despite what Jose Baez says, Holly, as we know, people have talked about this relationship between Casey and her lawyer before.
That's right. In fact, Kale, folks have said that this isn't the first time that they've noticed something that may have been a little bit inappropriate between Casey Anthony and her lawyer. We've heard about Casey and her attorney hugging at the jail and getting reprimanded. Jail officials say they were social hugs, but there were some moments in court last month where some say Baez and Anthony may have been flirting with each other. Now, Anthony's private investigators making some strange accusations of a Lady in the Tramp type act going on between the two at the jail.
This was the flirty video from court. Now Cindy and George Anthony's former private investigator, James Hoover, tells investigators that the other PI, Dominic Casey, told him about a strange interaction involving candy. Hoover told investigators that Baez brought red licorice with him to jail, that he was on one side of a piece of glass and Casey Anthony on the other. There was a hole in the middle of that glass, and Hoover told investigators, quote, he started eating on one side and, she was eating on the other side, so it looked like they were kissing through the glass or something, end quote. Hoover went on to say Dominic Casey told him that he and Baez were at the jail for 3 hours that night and that Baez and Casey Anthony never talked about the case.
Now, Baez released this comment through his spokesperson, quote, we are going to reserve comment on discovery releases until those times when discovery is of some importance to the real evidence in this case, end quote. And again, that was from Jose Baez. I also spoke with Alan Moore. He's the spokesperson for the Orange County Jail. He tells me that Dominic Casey has been at the jail with Baez twice for visits with Casey Anthony, but both times Baez and Casey were sitting in the same room, no glass between them. Moore also told me that those visits are monitored closely by jail personnel through some glass at all times, and he does not believe that any such incident could possibly have happened. Reporting live in the newsroom, Holly Bristow, Fox at 5.
Just works.
Tons of eye-opening information surfacing from the latest discovery in the case against Casey Anthony. Prosecutors painting a grim picture of her in the days leading up to her first arrest.
Hard times could be ahead for